Good evening. Welcome to the committee. I believe we have Jordan Goyette to speak on Senate Bill 597 and 773. You have approximately 5 minutes, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Chairwoman Quinn, and to members of the committee. I'd like to voice my strong support for S597 and S773 by Senators Acosta and Mack to respectively enact the Law Enforcement Accountability Act and repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And I really think both of these bills are necessary because if we do not at least pass these bills in the last summer of all the different protests that were held, the marches, the abuse that a lot of those protesters and trumped up charges that they faced from the police violence that they endured, just shows how badly we need to, first of all, repeal LEOBOR, because it's time to end special conditions for police officers that have eroded trust within neighborhoods and prohibit communities from holding public servants accountable. They already have protections from unions, which is already more than enough considering their position of law enforcement compared to someone who, say, works in human services within government. It's just a totally different dynamic. And no other profession has this kind of liability shield that both the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights provides and that qualified immunity provides. Because if I'm a steel worker and I murder someone on the job, I not only lose my job, I go to prison. And this current law just prevents communities from actually conducting investigations. Claims that brought before the panel rarely account in any kind of discipline. There was asked earlier what kind of actual incidents can be provided where an officer wasn't disciplined. The case of Joshua Robson in March of 2012, where he was beaten mercilessly by Providence police, sustained many severe injuries. Not only did the officers not lose their jobs, they received a $72,000 settlement from the city's taxpayers, and a few months later, one of the officers was even promoted. And we've seen countless cases of just where accountability and justice has not been really held. What happened to Rashad, Dora? He could have very easily become George Floyd, but Sergeant Hanley got just a year of probation for kicking him in the head. One wrong shot could have ended him just like that. So I think that really both of these are just the start of the conversation. This isn't about defunding the police. This isn't about abolishing the police. This is about starting from scratch on what we want our public safety to look like. Because I really think that it's not just a few bad apples at this point. I think because of the origins of our policing system, that there is a rot that has been allowed to grow and pervade the entire infrastructure of our current policing network in this country. And it's not just a few bad apples, it's a rotten tree. So that's all I have to say, really.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me the time. And I'm not an expert on the topics, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Let me see if any committee members have any questions. Yes, Senator Reptakis.
Madam Chairman, it's not a question, just a comment. It bothers me to hear a witness to disclaim the entire police departments of Rhode Island, whether it's the state police or local police, to claim that the whole system is rotted. That's his personal opinion, and I totally disagree. I think the police are there to protect all citizens, all residents of the state, and there might be a small percentage, a tiny percentage that we have to correct, and I think that's the right initiative that many of our colleagues have introduced legislation to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Reptakis. Very good. We'll move on now to public testimony on Senate Bill 773. Good evening. Welcome to the committee. I believe we have Mayor Jorge Elorza from the City of Providence on the line to speak on Senate Bill 773. You have 3.5 minutes, sir.
Great. Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, members of the committee, and thank you, Senator Tiara Mack. I'm here to speak in favor of Senate Bill 0773, the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. You know, as we talk about the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, you know, I ask everyone to consider this not from the standpoint of are you pro-police, are you anti-police, because this bill does neither one of those things. The main focus of LEOBOR is that it adds an additional layer of review anytime the local police chief disciplines one of his or her members. And as you know, the LEOBOR process kicks in after that police chief disciplines someone with a suspension for over 2 days. The question that I ask is, why don't we trust the police chief to make that decision? We don't impose an additional layer of review on any department director. We don't do it in DPW. We don't do it to superintendents. We don't do it to Parks Department directors. But somehow we do that to police chiefs, that we review their decisions to discipline their own members in a way that we don't do with anyone else. What is it about police chiefs that makes us trust them any less? In fact, I would think that if all of us, we think about the police chiefs in our communities, our police chiefs, they're some of the most trustworthy community members with the highest level of integrity and respect. If anything, I would think that they're giving even more deference anytime that they choose to discipline one of their members. And I believe that police chiefs throughout the state need the ability to manage their own departments. LEOBOR goes back to 1974. Back in 1974, unions did exist, but admittedly there were fewer employee protections back then. That has changed. Now there's the contract, there's state and federal labor laws, there's the grievance process. There are a lot of protections for employees that didn't exist back then. So while there might have been a reason to review police chiefs' decisions back in the early 1970s, those decisions don't apply anymore. And let's remember that most of the discipline that we're talking about here, they're administrative disciplines that never see the light of day. They're things such as perhaps a police officer has a pattern of taking sick days on a Friday or before a vacation. That's what we're talking about here. And police chiefs really need and deserve the ability to manage their own departments. The second part that LEOBOR does is that it also makes it difficult to speak publicly about ongoing issues. This day and age truly calls for the highest level of transparency, and LEOBOR keeps important information from the public. We all know that everyone is better served when more information is out there, but unfortunately, LEOBOR does the opposite. For these reasons, I support the full repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for joining us this evening, and thank you for your testimony. Do any committee members have any questions of Mayor Elorza? I don't see any at this time. Thank you, sir, again, for taking time to testify before us this evening on this bill.
Thank you.
Jack. Welcome to the Committee on Judiciary. I believe we have Gregory Waxmolsky, representing Amnesty International USA 1016. You have 3.5 minutes for your testimony. If you could please state your last name again for me.
Yes, thank you so much, Senator Quinn. I appreciate you chairing this committee tonight. So many weighty things come across your desk with so many people with opinions to express out here publicly. My name is Gregory Waxmolsky. You got it spot on. I am with Amnesty International Local 1016. There are a couple of us who are going to be speaking to you tonight. There are some really wonderful ways that Rhode Island can lead the nation. In our state, we have come out on top many times in our history, not the least of which was coffee milk. Now, I'm asking you, think about what kind of stuff was going on in the 1970s. when I have a look at the top 100 Billboard hits from 1970, that's when LEOBOR was started. That's when we passed LEOBOR. The state in 1971, you could see number 9 on the Billboard singles. Just my imagination running away with me by the Temptations. And I think, boy, imagine a society where we weren't afraid of a couple bad apples in the barrel spoiling things for the rest of what a lot of people see as a professional police force. I see here, You've Got a Friend by James Taylor. Imagine a society where community policing and alternatives to police responses were funded in ways that are commensurate with the way we appreciate they're needed in our society. We have a lot of mental health and behavioral health and recovery issues. We have a lot of crimes of desperation that could be solved if we had adequate funding for things as simple as recreation centers and opportunity zones and investment zones for economic opportunities for people in communities of color. I'm just telling you, there's a lot of great things on this list. LEOBOR isn't on here, but, number 3 that year was Carole King, I Feel the Earth Move. Could you imagine how we could move the earth for the rest of the nation if we led and we said no more? There's going to be no more thin blue line, which is copped from the mafia. The thin blue line has nothing to do with police. It means omerta. It means keeping your mouth shut when you know somebody's done something wrong. That's not the way that we need to protect police. Police are supposed to be beyond a shadow of a doubt protecting us. One last song from the Billboard was the Osmonds. The Osmonds in 1971, they had a really great song. It's called One Bad Apple. One bad apple gonna spoil the whole bunch, girl. Let's tip the barrel over. Let's lead the nation. We can do this. We heard in the House from hundreds of people. We're going to hear in the Senate tonight from even more. I know that you guys can do the right thing. Thank you so much for standing up for civil rights, for human rights, and for the rights of absolutely everybody, including the police. I think the guy who just testified right before me was saying, the police need to be able to tip the barrel over and find those bad apples. Let's help them. Let's do this. Thank you so much for your service.
And thank you so much for sticking with the time limit. We appreciate it. Any questions of committee members? Seeing none at this time, we'll move to our next witness. Welcome to our committee. I believe we have Luis Daniel Munoz speaking. You have 3.5 minutes, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity, and I will likely take less time than that. I am Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz, president of Pawtucket. I'm calling in support of Senator Mack's bill, SB 773, repeal of LEOBOR. And so my statement is, individuals from historically disenfranchised communities and community advocates time and time again have voiced their concerns about police brutality. And even if we're not presenting thousands of cases for a review or, robust study, ultimately there have been cases, there has been trauma, there's memory in the community, and any action other than legitimate programmatic change, other than dismantling a barrier to accountability, is really insufficient in terms of this response. And this is not about whether someone has expertise around policies or the 200 policies and standards that exist within Rhode Island's accreditation process. It really is just about understanding that there is less transparency and there is a lack of understanding as to the speed at which disciplinary action is taken by having this barrier, LEOBOR, still in place. Vincent Ragosta, a long-term labor attorney, in a Channel 10 interview in 2020, it was June, I believe, of 2020, stated that if Officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis had engaged in the conduct and the murder of George Floyd on Rhode Island soil, he would still be employed by a local Rhode Island police department. He would still have all of his benefits in place. Ragosta went on to say that LEOBOR in many respects is an impediment to swift accountability of an officer who crosses the line. And ultimately, what we all, I think, recognize is that transparency matters. And ultimately consequences matter. They impact behavior. Accreditation standards matter. But it's not until we repeal LEOBOR that we can take one step closer. We can take that step that's necessary to have a real deep discussion around the limited accreditation process we have in Rhode Island as compared to the national accreditation process, and the need to make accreditation in Rhode Island not voluntary but mandatory. Now, that's a deeper and broader discussion, but ultimately I believe that repealing LEOBOR, having more transparency, and really having the opportunity to have a swift justice when people cross the line is essential, because there should be no leeway when an unjustified act of violence is visited upon a person, especially when it comes from a law enforcement officer who should adhere to the highest standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening.
You as well.
Thank you. Our next witness is Kirk Robinson. Good evening, Kirk Robinson.
Hey, what's up?
Welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Cool, thank you. I'll try to be brief. My name's Kirk Robinson. I live at 11 Eagle Street in Providence. Calling today in support of Senate Bill 773, which repeals LEOBOR for the state of Rhode Island. So Rhode Island is a little bit outside, actually kind of, not a little bit, kind of a lot of it, for lack of a better term, outside of the norm in the United States when it comes to states that have enacted legislation to codify something like a LEOBOR, a law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights. So we have these extra protections for police, but I would think that these extra protections ultimately end up protecting police in ways that would not hold them completely accountable to the public that they serve. And so, just looking through the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights for Rhode Island, there's some things here that are pretty disturbing. Really, interpretations of the law that could, in essence, mean something like, for example, if evidence of a non-criminal misconduct comes to light more than 3 years after an officer commits an injury to someone, police department can't hold them accountable. Oftentimes in law enforcement, it seems like there's a culture of protecting each other, which makes sense. It's not something that you blame an individual for. But in other words, police can be LEOBOR basically protects police from abuses that have been committed that are not, immediately brought to light. And I feel like that's a big problem, especially, we take a step back and we look at the United States right now and how police have conducted themselves over the last year. It seems that it's pretty important to have the tools necessary to hold police accountable, because oftentimes they're just using excessive force on people who are committing things that are technically protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, like, right to assembly, right to express oneself, so on and so forth. So, I support this bill. I think this bill would put us in the same sort of arena as where other states are in the United States. It'd put us kind of more in the mainstream, and it would move us towards, I think, a system in which we can do a better job of holding police accountable for when they go too far. Which, and there's video evidence of this all the time. In fact, the city of Providence released some video, I believe it was on the 7th of May, showing not only excessive force, but I believe, killing someone. And that sort of made the rounds online. And it's really horrible stuff. So I think police need to be more accountable to the public, and I think repealing LEOBOR would do that. And so that's it. I think I covered what I wanted to say. I appreciate your consideration, and I hope the committee moves the bill to the Senate floor for a full vote.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any members of the committee for this witness? Hearing none, thank you. Have a nice evening. Our next witness is Susanna Holloway from the Barrington Interfaith Partners. Good evening, Susanna Holloway.
Yes, hello.
Yes, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes to testify. You may proceed.
Thank you so much. My name is Susanna Holloway. I live at 64 Fales Avenue in Barrington, Rhode Island. I am asking you to please support Senate Bill 773, repeal LEOBOR. I am a middle-aged Barrington resident, and I and my Barrington friends are committed to repealing LEOBOR. I am horrified at the example of Sergeant Hanley having been found guilty of assault in district court of kicking Rashad Gore in the head, and yet he continues to serve on the Providence police force. Sergeant Hanley remains on the force today because of LEOBOR. Chief Clemens cannot discipline him. Trust our police chiefs, get rid of LEOBOR, and let them discipline their officers. It makes no sense to have police officers armed with guns making split-second decisions with quasi-military armament and powers being outside the chain of command to their superior officers. I worked at the North Carolina Attorney General's office where we had a military culture chain of command, and it worked. We took orders, did as we were told, and all communication went up and down the chain of command. Police officers should operate under a strict chain of command because they have weapons. Furthermore, we live in a democracy. Our police officers, every day as they walk the streets, embody our Constitution and our laws. To many citizens, the police officers they encounter are our government. And yet, because of LEOBOR, our elected officials and their police chiefs have no control over these government representatives. And so we, the people who elect the officials who hire the police chiefs, have no control over our police forces of a democratic government. That is not okay. That is not right. That is what brings chaos to our streets in terms of officers kicking people in the head. It is irresponsible, and it is irresponsible that their chiefs cannot fire them. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Have a nice evening. Our next witness is Catherine Quinn with the Barrington Equity Collaborative. Good evening, Catherine Quinn. Good evening, Catherine Quinn.
Hello?
Yes, good evening, Catherine Quinn.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Hi.
welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes to testify, and you may proceed.
Oh, okay, thanks. My name's Catherine Quinn. I'm born and bred in Providence, Rhode Island, grew up here, and currently live in Barrington, raising my 3 children in Barrington. And I just wanted to thank Senator Quinn, who is from my town, both for her service here and also for her service as a state trooper. And Senator Archambault, I understand you were also a police officer, and I want to be very clear to start off that I have deep respect for police officers and also completely support repeal of LEOBOR out of respect for the police officers who are doing their job well, who do not need the added protection of the legislation that is LEOBOR. Because, like Mayor Elorza already stated, there is already ample protection for those police officers as they deserve from their union contract. So I did a little research because I needed to understand why this legislation would make any sense, because I don't think things don't make any sense. And the only way it makes sense is that it was created in the 70s, and it just hasn't been reviewed, and it hasn't been brought up for, review, basically, and it's not talked about a lot. And there's been a lot of mischaracterization in this very meeting by senators who I respect, and I know they're doing their best, but they have too much on their plate. This legislation has been characterized as returning us to the Wild West. It's been referred to as throwing police under the bus. It's also been referred to by a senator who presented a different bill as being a vote against the police. That's not what this is. This is actually a very respectful attempt to allow police officers to do their job with the ample protections that they're provided by the police union and not add an extra layer, which would only be necessary if they were doing something that they needed to hide from the public. So Rhode Island is the only state in New England that has this legislation. Massachusetts and New York State do not have this legislation. the only other states that have it, there are only 14 other states in the country that have it. And so I wanted to figure out what is it that makes Rhode Island and those other 14 states alike. And the thing that's different about Rhode Island from those other states that have LEOBOR is that our union contract is incredibly strong and it protects our police officers. So the states that have LEOBOR in the country right now that have this legislation, it makes sense for them to have LEOBOR because their police officers are not protected by strong union protection. However, Rhode Island has strong union protection for police officers. So for us to have LEOBOR on top of that makes it irrelevant. And the only state that is like Rhode Island is in terms of strong police protection by the union is Maryland. And Maryland just repealed their LEOBOR legislation because they recognize that it's antiquated, it's regressive, and it just needs to be done away with. This is not in any way a disrespectful or a lawless proposal. We are simply asking that the police, who have a wonderful police union to represent them, and they have a strong contract, and we support them. They just received a $12 million raise in their in the budget. There is nothing about this bill that is asking to take away the power from the police or to put them in any sort of jeopardy. We're just asking to allow Rhode Island to live up to its name. We are no longer Rhode Island and Providence Plantation, so could we not have plantation policing here? That would be great.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Are there any questions from any members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is Jenna Israel. Good evening, Jenna Israel.
Yes, hello.
Yes, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Thank you. My name is Jenna Israel. I live in Providence. I wanted to say that people, the very few people who might argue for keeping LEOBOR, they might argue that LEOBOR protects officers from being unfairly fired, but as Jordan Goyette explained before, police already have unions to do that. LEOBOR is just an extra layer of protection for police officers that literally no other job has. What LEOBOR actually allows for is for officers who have abused their powers and hurt the people and communities that they're meant to be protecting to keep their jobs and continue abusing their powers. If someone in another job did anything like what some of these officers are doing, kicking people in the head, kneeling on someone until they can't breathe anymore, there would be absolutely no question of them being fired. But people in other careers have lost their jobs over far less than the sheer brutality we've seen from police officers in Rhode Island. I also want to emphasize that reforming the LEOBOR, like the other bill that's being heard today, is not enough. We need real accountability for violent, abusive police officers, and that requires a full repeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our next witness is Wendy Oliver. Good evening, Wendy Oliver.
Yes.
Yes, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Okay, right now? I hear somebody else testifying right now.
No, that's coming from your own background noise. Whatever you have on, you need to turn off, please. And then if you could start,
sure.
It's okay. It happens. I'll start you right now. Go ahead. 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is Wendy Oliver. This is Wendy Oliver, and I live in Pawtucket. And I am calling about Senate Bill S773. And I am in support of repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. In Rhode Island, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights prevents our cities and states from holding officers fully accountable for unnecessary use of force and demeaning treatment of some of our citizens. No other Rhode Island public employees have this level of protection against disciplinary actions. With the repeal of this Bill of Rights, officers will still have recourse to the same legal defense enjoyed by other public employees, but they will no longer have the extra rights of LEOBOR. It will also make it easier for the police chiefs to discipline or fire officers who violate regulations. A few years ago, Rhode Island resident Joshua Robinson was severely beaten in 2013 by the Providence police during a traffic stop. More recently, Rashad Dora was beaten during an unexplained arrest. While most police officers do not use excessive force, some do, and this is both unfair and inhumane. If there is no mechanism for unbiased prosecution for officers using excessive force during arrest, as well as during routine traffic stops, those officers predisposed to such actions will be permitted to carry on with business as usual. This business as usual, unfortunately, tends to focus on citizens of color and perpetuates a climate of fear and injustice. The state of Maryland was the first to repeal its Officers' Bill of Rights in April 2021. Let's take this opportunity to join them and take a step towards justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is Miguel Sanchez. Good evening, Miguel Sanchez.
Hello, how you doing?
Hi, I'm well. How are you? You're welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes, and you may proceed.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, committee members. My name is Miguel Sanchez. I'm here as a Providence resident to testify in support of Senate Bill 773. First, I would like to thank the sponsors for this important piece of legislation. Repealing the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights will allow the community to hold police departments across the state accountable. We need private, independent people to review police misconduct, not fellow police officers. LEOBOR has been a major obstacle to pushing for social justice over the years. It affords police a level of protection that has allowed them to evade consequences for bad conduct in many instances. These protections have historically enabled a system that again and again sees law enforcement figures undermining the rights of marginalized people in the U.S., particularly in the black and brown communities. LEOBOR allows officers to sidestep responsibility and hide actions from the public. It's honestly embarrassing that Rhode Island still has the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. No other New England state has such legislation. Thank you for your time, committee members.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any members of the committee? No, thank you. You have a nice evening. If everybody would just stand by, we're trying to get a caller. Our next caller is Luis Vargas Rivera. Good evening, Luis Vargas Rivera.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? Welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes, and you may proceed.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Vargas Rivera. I'm a resident of the south side of Providence, and I'm here to testify in support of the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. And I want to start by just asking a rhetorical question, and that question is, you know, each and every one of us as individuals has the protection of the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. And my question is our Bill of Rights not enough for police officers? For me, officers do not need their own Bill of Rights. And I say this as someone who doesn't support abolishing policing in general. I say this as someone who has just witnessed police abuses across our city and across the nation and has had enough. And specifically in Rhode Island, we have a very strong Officers' Bill of Rights, and I'm going to list a few of the problems with that Bill of Rights and why I think it should be repealed rather than amended. I don't think there's any portion of the bill that is redeemable. I don't see why any of it is necessary, and here are some specific provisions that I have problems with. Under the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights in Rhode Island, the accused has more rights than an individual who's accused of a crime. The accused gets to know the name of their complainant. They get special privileges when they're being interrogated. They can only be interrogated by one officer at a time. When they're accused of misconduct, there are time restrictions upon which they can be interrogated. They cannot be threatened with losing their job while they're being interrogated for their misconduct. And all of these are things that are not the case when an individual, a member of the public, is accused of misconduct. On top of that, when an officer is accused of misconduct under the Bill of Rights, they are judged by their fellow police officers. In other words, the punishment for misconduct is decided by other police officers. And I just frankly think that's ridiculous. They're keeping it in the family, essentially, and that's not how justice is supposed to be administered. Moreover, even if a police officer is found to have committed misconduct by that panel of other police officers, and even if they are convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor, as is the case with Sergeant Hanley, the department, in administering the misconduct claim, has to defend that officer at their own cost. And so police departments across the state have to pick up the cost of defending the actions of those police who are accused of misconduct, which is just backwards. And then even if they're convicted of a felony, convicted of a misdemeanor, and they're suspended, as is the case with Sergeant Hanley right now, the taxpayers continue to be on the line for dental insurance, medical insurance, and everything like that, which is also ridiculous. I have a lot of respect for the senators who have introduced their own bills that are aimed at amending the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, and while I think their intentions are good, I think that a full repeal is much better, and I urge each committee member to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from any witness? Any member of the committee, excuse me. Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you. Our next witness is Jalea Joseph from BLM Rhode Island PAC. Good evening, Jalea Joseph.
Good evening.
Yes, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I will be testifying in support of Senate Bill 773, which would repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. The lack of police accountability across the state of Rhode Island is unacceptable and is something that has been making communities feel uneasy for years. Police officers shouldn't be allowed to have special rights just for the simple fact that they're police officers. And this year alone, we have seen so much violence from law enforcement inflicted on communities across the country and even here in the state of Rhode Island. Why are police officers the ones who are supposed to protect us, but in turn go back on that vow and then not even have to take accountability for their misconduct? I'm 15 years old and I have conversations with other kids my age every single day about policing and law enforcement. My peers feel uneasy whenever they're in police presence, and some of them have had violent experiences with the police and end up not saying anything about it because they know at the end of the day they won't be heard and the officer who committed the misconduct won't have to take accountability. This must end, and it ends with your vote to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is Andrew Poyne. Good evening, Andrew Poyne.
Good evening. How are you
Welcome to
doing,
the committee. I'm okay. How are you? You have 3.5 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Poyne. I'm a resident of Providence, and I'm calling in favor of Bills 773 and 253. The Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights is set up in order to slow down the accountability and to deny accountability of police. And I think that, if there's the only way we can ever have accountability within police forces is by a full repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. So we're watching. I hope that this ends up moving out of committee and goes to a full Senate vote. I also want to see the support of 253, which reduces which won't and state police to work with immigration officers, as well as making sure that immigration officers don't go into schools, hospitals, churches, other places, religious worship places, or courts. And I find this is very important. There's been many cases throughout the country where immigration officers and those imposing immigration laws locally have arrested citizens of the U.S. as well as people that are lawfully here, and they hold them they end up getting held up because they don't have, their passport on them, but who walks around with a passport, and they just go around, terrorizing people that happen to not be white or have an accent. And I think that, I fully support both of these bills. It's really important for our communities to feel safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any member of the committee for this witness? No? Thank you. You have a nice evening.
You too.
Thank you. Our next witness is Harrison Tuttle with BLM Rhode Island PAC. Good evening, Harrison Tuttle.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. You have 3.5 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you. My name is Harrison Tuttle. I'm the Executive Director of Black Lives Matter RI PAC. I think all the testimonies that have been given today has been a great example of how the community feels. And, when it comes to the repeal of LEOBOR, it's not even an anti-police bill. This bill strictly maintains the point that there are 15 states in this country that even have LEOBOR. And so the question becomes, why does Rhode Island have LEOBOR, and what is the purpose of it? And the examples have been given throughout the entire evening tonight, and I just want to basically say that without the repeal of LEOBOR, what you guys are telling the community, what you are telling our communities of color, is that our lives don't matter. And we have time in and time again, protest after protest after protest, specifically this summer. And what is this summer? What is the one thing that everybody has been clamoring over? What is the one thing that we're calling for? We're calling for accountability. And without the repeal of LEOBOR, then there is no accountability. There is no care for community input on policing. And so I just want to first off say that, I appreciate the fact that there are people that are putting forward reform bills, but that's not good enough. And we know that throughout the country, throughout the New England area, that a LEOBOR is not necessary. And so I just want to say that without the community support, you and the rest of your constituents will never be happy, because they do not reflect the intentions of our BIPOC community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any member of the committee for this individual? No? Thank you. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is Francis Strickler. Good evening, Francis Strickler.
Hi, speaking.
Yes, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may begin.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Francis Strickler, and I am a Providence resident and work as a paraprofessional at one of our local schools. I'm calling tonight in support of Bill 773 in hopes of repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. As you might imagine, being an educator over the past year has been very challenging, but the hardest part of my job this year has had nothing to do with COVID. Rather, the hardest part has been continuously needing to support young students as they attempt to process instance after instance and video after video of police killings, assaults, and other abuses of power. With younger students, there is often still a belief in the ideals of fairness and responsibility that are preached at them so often, that when they are forced to witness a lack of regard for human life, that something will be done about it. With older students, the reality of the situation has already sunk in, that those ideals do not apply when it comes to our system of policing. That when the doer of harm wears the uniform and when the victim looks like them, chances are nothing will be done about it. I am not sure which of these two understandings, that of the younger students or that of the older, is more heartbreaking. What I do know is that I am past tired of having these conversations. I am past tired of being expected to promote fairness and responsibility and community with young people when our own government systems continue to blatantly disregard these principles. Repealing LEOBOR will not solve these problems, but it is a step in the right direction. For the sake of all of us and for the sake of young people in Providence and across Rhode Island, I urge you to do the right thing tonight in advancing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from this witness from any members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is, if you could stand by for 1 minute. Our next witness is Brittany Palumbo. Good evening, Brittany Palumbo.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brittany Palumbo. I live in Federal Hill. I'm calling in support of Senate Bill 773 to repeal the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights in its entirety. And this is literally the bare minimum the legislature could do to hold our police system accountable. Law enforcement officers do not need a Bill of Rights. They have all of the rights and protection our white supremacist culture has to offer. They have strong unions. They have qualified immunity. What did Jamal Gonzalez have? Rashad Gore? Folks in the state marched all summer long last year asking for accountability. This bill scratches the surface of those demands. Make our police accountable. We cannot have something in place that prevents communities from investigating misconduct, that prevents disciplinary action for officers who have engaged in that misconduct. This bill is just common sense. There are practically no other workplaces that don't have an avenue for addressing harm. I work in healthcare. If I gave somebody adenosine instead of atropine, I would not only face disciplinary consequences, I would be in court. If you work in a field where use of excessive force is not only possible but happens on a daily basis, you should just expect to face recourse. Repealing LEOBOR would simply mean officers are treated the same as any other government official in court. Do what this community is asking. Pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any member of the committee for this witness? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening.
Thank you. Welcome to the Committee on Judiciary. You have 3.5 minutes for your testimony. Could you please introduce yourself, please? Hello?
Yes, sorry, I muted myself. Hi, my name is Sami Amki. I'm a resident of Providence and a community organizer. Formerly worked at the Department of Health as a COVID case investigator. And I wanted to testify today for the bill to repeal LEOBOR.
You have 3.5 minutes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So, I come before you today as a very concerned citizen, as an organizer in the community, and someone who, does a lot of public health work. And I recently had a piece where I wrote about the actions of the police in Rhode Island, and it's very unfortunate. But just a few days later, after that piece got published, we saw Providence police deal with someone who was having clear medical distress in a way that led to their death. And this is an incident that's been widely publicized, so if you have not heard of it, I encourage you to look it up. But 5 Providence police officers, kneeled on a man's back until he stopped breathing. So it's these kinds of incidents that really make you question why they have a law enforcement officer Bill of Rights. There's been virtually no accountability of any kind for officers when they violate their own procedures, when they violate the law, when they lead to harm and even death. And we saw this with a victim of domestic violence being further brutalized in a police station and has yet to get any accountability or justice for that. Her name was Simone Phoenix. We saw that when police in Providence surrounded and harassed and brutalized Jermaine Bruce for helping his friend jumpstart her car at night. We saw that when Providence police beat and nearly killed Rashad Gore. So I say all these things not just to sort of list off the many instances, because I would be here all night, but to say that we have seen zero accountability, and one of the main obstacles to seeing that is the fact that any cop can commit any crime and go against their own department policy whenever they want, and it's bills like LEOBOR and these sort of fake accountability measures of internal investigation that stand in the way of there being any sort of accountability for police. I don't know why, people with guns and the ability to arrest are given extra protections over any other public servant and basically given a blank check. I think this is extremely harmful. So, I've just laid out the moral case, and I think now, in terms of the electoral piece, for all of you who are listening in the Senate, these things do not happen in a vacuum. If this bill doesn't get out of committee, people are going to take note of the votes and how people voted. And that's going to, come back and be reflected in the organizing done across the state in the election process. So, if I can appeal to you on your morals, I appeal to you that if you go against this, something that is extremely popular amongst the people of this state, you will most definitely face electoral consequences. So I urge you to support the repeal of LEOBOR. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I believe Senator Rogers has a question for you. Senator Rogers.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick question. I keep hearing, I'll make a statement also before I ask a question. Well, without solutions, eliminating something without a solution isn't an answer to anything. So I keep hearing we need to eliminate the officer's Bill of Rights, and that will solve the problem. So I want to lead you down the path and ask the question. I don't see the solution on the other end. So I'm going to ask you, how does this correct the ills that you say are so out there? How, by eliminating this, how does that solve the problem? Where does the fix come in? Enlighten me, please.
Go ahead.
I'm very glad you asked. How much time do I have to respond?
If you could keep it brief, please, to a minute or so, that would be awesome.
Sure thing. Yes, I'm very glad you asked, Senator. I'm actually one of the co-chairs of the Defund the Police Working Group of the Providence DSA. So it's not just about repealing this one ridiculous bill. Obviously, it's much more. It's much more comprehensive than that. This is one step, because this offers a shield to any officer who brutalizes people, who even murders people, that they will escape any semblance of accountability. There is no other profession where you can do that. And so the answer is clearly not, we're going to repeal LEOBOR and we're not going to have a single protest, everything's going to be great, we're going to sing Kumbaya. No. There are people right now, myself included, who are working on creating alternatives to policing so that, there's these crimes of poverty and these instances where police are not needed to respond, where we need is people's peers, we need people to de-escalate, we need clinical workers, we need social workers, not police. So I am with you on that. This is not enough. But this is a critical first step to make sure that if and when, and unfortunately, over and over again, we've seen this happen, police violate people's rights, they go against their department policy, there is a way to actually hold them accountable. And LEOBOR stands in the way of that and gives them a blank check to pursue whatever policy they want, knowing that nothing is going to happen to them. And that never happened. You could not do that as a state senator. You could not get away with murder because there is no state senator Bill of Rights, and there should not be. And this is the same thing with police. So I urge you to reconsider and to really think about what these police are given the right to do, because they could do it to you too if you lose your seat of power. There's nothing protecting you from that. And there's a law enforcement officer Bill of Rights to make sure that they would never be held accountable for any harm they did to you, that was unjust.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. I appreciate it. We're going to move to our next witness now. I believe it is Ian Lawson. Welcome to our committee. I believe we have Ian Lawson on the phone. You have 3.5 minutes, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Ian Lawson. I am a resident of Warren, and I'm here to express my support for Bill S-773 to repeal Rhode Island's statute entitled the Law Enforcement Officer's Bill of Rights. I'll keep it short. Power demands accountability. That is supposedly one of the principles we founded this nation on. And the Law Enforcement Officer's Bill of Rights systematically removes that accountability and puts barriers in the way. We know that we wouldn't trust any of our branches of government to hold themselves accountable, and I think the same should certainly apply for law enforcement. There are already standard due process protections in place, just like they are for any governmental official. And there is no reason that is convincing to me to add extra protections on top of that, especially when we are dealing with the one agency that has the power to exert force and coercion and even death. And when, as I'm sure you've heard from other testimonies this evening, there are plenty of examples for why we need more accountability than we currently have. So I support full repeal of the Law Enforcement Officer's Bill of Rights, and I urge everyone on the committee to support that repeal as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your concise testimony. I appreciate that. I don't see any questions. Could we please move to the next witness? I believe we have Alan McCloud on the line. You have 3.5 minutes, sir.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Alan McCloud. I'm here to testify in favor of Senate Bill 773, which would repeal the entirety of the Law Enforcement Officer's Bill of Rights in Providence. And the reason that I am in favor of this bill is simple. Namely that I really don't see a need for it, and in fact see active harm being perpetuated as a result of it. In a city where as recently as last night or 2 nights ago, we have law enforcement officers killing residents of the city, a system that not only gives law enforcement officers a separate form of due process to be held accountable, but also does such things as have a summary discipline period of only 2 days, and a panel made entirely of police officers right now. Frankly, I think it's beyond time to repeal protections for law enforcement officers that nobody was asking for in the first place, and that were granted as a request of police union forces, whose goal are namely to protect officers from accountability. I see the removal as of the Law Enforcement Officer's Bill of Rights as a necessary first step, in creating greater accountability for police misconduct in the city of Rhode Island, and frankly, disallowing many tax dollars from going to officers who are put on administrative leave, rack up all of these accrued hours on leave for which they are not paid, and then to be reinstated to the police force after an investigation of only police officers clear them of wrongdoing. It's a waste of taxpayer money. It's protections that nobody asked for police officers other than the police unions, and it's actively harming residents of Providence. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. Seeing no questions at this time, we will move to the next witness. Good evening. Welcome to the Committee on Judiciary. I believe we have Ilana, and I'm sorry I cannot pronounce your last name. You have, if you could please state your name, and you have 3.5 minutes for your testimony, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ilana. I'm a resident in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm testifying on behalf of myself in support of Bill 773 to repeal LEOBOR. Also, as a side note, I support Bill 253 to make Rhode Island a sanctuary state. But about Bill 773, I remember the day in high school that one of my friends, he had a couple of family members who were members of law enforcement, and I remember the day that I was at my locker and he mentioned he just got his learner's permit on his driver's license, and he mentioned that because one of his family members was a member of an organization, I don't want to misstate it, but I believe it was the Fraternal Order of Police, because his family member was part of this, he said that he had a card in his wallet that if he got pulled over, he could show the officer who pulled him over this card and they would likely let him go. And I remember hearing that and thinking, how could that happen? How could someone, just be able to get away with something that other people wouldn't? And I just thought I was missing something. It seemed like kind of an elementary case of like what, is fair and how standards get applied to different people. But this was also, I think, the year after Michael Brown's murder in Ferguson and before, so many other police murders. And I remember also much more recently learning that the conviction of Derek Chauvin and the murder of George Floyd was one of, I think, 8 or even less such convictions since the mid-2000s. And so I can only conclude that we have an accountability problem with policing. And as many others before me have said in their testimony, we need accountability and transparency. This is just the least of what the 27 million people who are in the streets this past summer were demanding. It's the tip of the iceberg to just not hold police above the law. And the repeal of LEOBOR brings us closer to this accountability and transparency. There is so much transformation that we need, and I hope you will join us, senators, in this important step of the process.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to take any questions.
I would like to have you pronounce your last name, though. I'm sorry, I couldn't for the record.
Yep, my last name is pronounced House Connect.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions at this time. Thank you for your testimony this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to the committee. I believe we have Tracy Miller on the line. If you could turn down the volume in the back that you have on. Great.
Yes, I just did.
Thank you. You have 3.5 minutes for your testimony, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Tracy Miller. I live in Providence, and I work at Brown, though speaking for myself. I also have a master's degree in public policy, so legislative hearings are always important to me. This one I'm attending for reasons related to Senate Bill 773. I am in support. Before I share just a few details about that, I would also like to express my support for some of these other wonderful bills on the agenda tonight, including one of your bills, Senator Quinn, 312, 316, 333, 541, 672, and I will move on to 773. Yes. I think I've been listening to the testimony all afternoon, and I think the question for me at this point is, why do we need LEOBOR? Rather than having the public ask for it to be repealed, I would like to hear from the police officers, the chiefs, the Brotherhood of Police Officers, why we still need it. I've heard that it is, in fact, used very infrequently. If we think that we have an issue of simply a few bad apples, why do we need LEOBOR to address that problem? That's my question at this point in the evening. And Senator Archambault, I don't think this is related to throwing law enforcement under the bus. I think the mayor did a great job of expressing the history of LEOBOR and it being developed at a time when police didn't have as many protections as they do now through the strong union that they have. So I do hope the committee will move this to a floor vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us this evening. We will now move to our next witness. Welcome to the committee, Emma. I believe we have Emma Boughton on the line. You have 3.5 minutes for your testimony, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Emma Boughton. I live at 153 William Street in Providence, and I'm calling in support of Senate Bill 773. I believe that we need to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights because we need to hold the police accountable for wrongdoing just like any other resident in Rhode Island. It is completely unacceptable that even with substantial evidence that police or other law enforcement officers have harmed someone, that they get paid time off with benefits. Furthermore, I find it completely backwards that officers accused of wrongdoing are investigated by their own colleagues, people who inherently share common values, norms, and practices, having worked in the same field. How can someone embedded in the same workplace culture and potentially even a close friend possibly have enough distance from the wrongdoing to judge it fairly? Likewise, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights does nothing to address the fact that it's in the investigated person's interest to lie about the reasons for their behavior. It is abundantly clear that this document is intended to shield the police from being held accountable for crimes they have committed. It is backwards and standing in the way of our state genuinely working towards racial justice. It is clear where ordinary people across Rhode Island and the country stand on this issue. I was part of the march in Providence this summer that brought thousands of people into the streets to protest police killings and to demand justice. Repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights is one key step in making Rhode Island a safer and more just place for all people. I expect you to make the right vote here and repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions? I see none at this time. We'll now move to our next witness. Good evening. Welcome to the committee. Thank you for joining us. I believe I have Samantha Weiser, representing Rhode Island Democratic Women's Caucus on the line. You have 3.5 minutes for your testimony. You may begin.
Thank you. My name is Samantha Weiser, and as you mentioned tonight, I am testifying on behalf of the Rhode Island Democratic Women's Caucus. The Women's Caucus seeks to impact government and political processes in order to ensure equality in power, influence, and economic status for those who identify as and with women. To that end, and to further ensure equality and influence, especially for our sisters of color, on behalf of the Democratic Women's Caucus, tonight we testify strongly in favor of Bills S733, S597, and S253. S733, repealing the Law Officers' Bill of Rights, otherwise known as LEOBOR, as well as S597, requiring body cameras, are important steps towards accountability for our police. Rhode Island is not exempt from the nationwide reckoning with our justice system. From the Hanley case to the shooting of Deshaun Cole in 2018 to this past week with a man quite close to my own home suffering from a health crisis, dying in police custody, we see the problems of accountability in our own backyards. With LEOBOR, we create a system that gives a specific segment of civil servants a special status with special rights that the public they are supposed to serve lacks. By repealing it, we can take a step towards honesty, equality, and accountability. We can create external oversight bodies, create a streamlined system to establish guilt or innocence, and allow discipline for misconduct. Most importantly, we must minimize the extent to which law enforcement officers have extra due process and special rights that other civil servants do not have. The Women's Caucus would also like to speak strongly in favor of S253, providing increased protection for our undocumented friends and neighbors. Regardless of immigration status, people should be able to seek medical care, go to school, worship, and access our judicial system without fear of ambush and deportation. Too often we have seen these important and personal places used as an excuse or gateway for ICE to find and arrest undocumented people without so much even as a warrant. And schools, churches, healthcare facilities, and courts cannot function as a funnel for arrest and investigation. These places must remain safe for children and their families. The Women's Caucus urges you to pass S733, S597, and S253 out of committee tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha, for your testimony. We'll now move to the next witness. Good evening. Welcome to our committee. I believe we have Rebecca Chant on the phone. You have 3.5 minutes, ma'am, for your testimony.
Okay, thank you so much. I probably won't take that full time. I live in Providence, and I'm just calling to support the bill that is repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. I think that, they really don't need their own separate Bill of Rights. We see that police officers consistently get protected for doing things that most citizens would be immediately jailed for. There still hasn't been justice for Jamon Gonzalez in Providence, I believe, and so I think these types of bills only protect cops further, and they don't need it because we know that the state already is always going to back them up. And so I think this is the first step we need in like getting justice for people who are victims of police brutality. So I wholeheartedly support the bill to repeal.
Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you for taking time to join us this evening, and we appreciate your testimony. Next,
you.
we'll move on
Take
to our
care.
next
Bye.
witness. Good evening. Welcome to the Committee on Judiciary. I believe we have Cedric Russell on the phone right now to testify. You have 3.5 minutes, sir. You may begin. Do I have Cedric Russell on the phone? Hello? Okay, do we have Cedric Russell on the phone? Committee members, please stand by. Yeah, you can move on to the... You can, welcome to the Committee on Judiciary. I believe I have Mariel Burt representing Providence DSA on the line. You have 3.5 minutes for your testimony, ma'am.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, thanks for your time and agreeing to speak to me. I am just calling to say that I believe that the LEOBOR bill should be repealed, and that this new proposal to get rid of that is going to be a really important action for our city. I think that, like, the most important thing is that police officers are held to the same standards as any other citizen, and we've seen in multiple instances in our city's history how this piece of legislation, or rather this set of rules that allow privileges for law enforcement officers continually allow for unjust harm and a lack of accountability for our police force in the city. So I'm looking to you all to be leaders in bringing a new phase of justice in Providence, and I see that repealing the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights as an essential first step in making that happen.
Thank you very much for your very concise testimony. We appreciate that. And I don't see any questions at this time. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Will we... Yep. Good evening. Welcome to the committee. I believe we have Justin Royas on the phone. You have 3.5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the members on this committee for holding this hearing today. My name is Justin Royas. I'm a proud resident of Providence, and I'm a school social worker and licensed therapist. I'm here to express my full support for Senator Mac's bill, Senate Resolution 773, which, if passed, would repeal the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights completely. I support Senator Mac's bill for many reasons. LEOBOR has impeded police accountability across the state. For this reason, any hope of fostering trust between law enforcement and the community is ultimately undermined because LEOBOR makes it damn near impossible to fire cops who engage in misconduct and wrongdoing. That's just a fact. And there are countless examples in Rhode Island if we simply take a trip down memory lane. Take, for example, the now infamous May 2009 incident at the Twin River Casino in Lincoln, during which a Lincoln police officer by the name of Edward Goyette was captured on video kicking a woman in the head as she sat handcuffed on the curb outside the casino. As outrageous as this sounds, the Lincoln police officer received no jail time. It was not fired from the Lincoln Police Department because under LEOBOR, he was granted the right to a hearing in which a panel of fellow cops would determine his professional fate. We can also look at a recent example that happened in Providence on April 19, 2020, which Sergeant Joseph Hanley, a 17-year veteran of the Providence Police Department, which was charged and found guilty of assaulting 20-year-old Rashad Gore. During the arrest, Sergeant Hanley repeatedly kicked and struck Rashad Gore while he was handcuffed and lying on the ground, all while verbally taunting him. Again, as outrageous as it sounds, even after the April 19th incident, Hanley was still employed by the Providence Police Department and was receiving a paycheck for 6 months as required by LEOBOR. Those are just a few knowable cases, but it proves the salient point that LEOBOR has made the rights of police officers greater than those of other private and public sector employees, and has allowed police officers to live under a different set of laws than the citizens they are expected to police. And so I urge this committee to not just settle for cosmetic changes to LEOBOR, but to follow in the footsteps of Maryland by becoming the second state to repeal this law completely. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. And thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to the committee. I believe we have Miko Lincoln on the line. You have 3 minutes and 30 seconds for your testimony. If you could just turn down the volume in the background, we would appreciate it.
Sonny, I just want to know exactly which bill are we going, because I was signed up for two.
You have, I believe it's 773 and 333.
We're doing them both simultaneously?
Yes, please. And actually, if you want, I can give you 5 minutes on that because you're doing two bills.
Okay. So I think I could speak to S333, and the reason why I'm asking in support of this particular bill, but I would like to also say I'm sorry. One moment, please. My material got caught on my computer. I apologize.
Okay.
And
Are you good to testify?
I am good to testify. I apologize. It's just
and sir, if you have written testimony and would like to email that or send us to us, you may do that too. If you're not ready.
I understand. I just have bullet points. I apologize, and I'm asking this committee, the Judiciary Committee, if you guys could please consider Bill 333 I'm definitely in support of it. However, I would like to see some type of, amendments to the bill. They're kind of like mirror House Bill 5144. And the reason why I'm saying that is because there's some real serious concerns that I have. My brother, who was incarcerated when he was 16 years old, he was, he's waived over from Rhode Island Training School and sentenced into adult correctional institution for 60 years with 30 years served. The reason why he was given 60 years with 30 years served and not a life sentence without the possibility of parole is because he had he pled out. He took a deal. And I know that many of the inmates serving those types of sentences, life without the possibility of parole or life with really, 20 years to serve before they're eligible for parole. The reason why those sentences is given to them, and for my experiences, because I'm a person that was formerly incarcerated as well, it's because those people exercised their constitutional right and actually went to trial and essentially was punished further for exercising their constitutional right, as opposed to accepting a sentence of less than if they would have pled out and pled no or guilty. So I know that is one of the reasons why I'm in support of this particular bill. I think it's really important to raise that concern. Also, I understand that, me, I'm 49 years old. I've been incarcerated since I was in the Rhode Island Training School for Boys. I haven't committed such a serious felony offense as murder or something that was capital offense that could possibly land me in prison for the rest of my life. But one of the things I am now is I'm a reentry case manager, and I assist individuals who are excellent. The point I'm trying to make is that I have learned to navigate society, but after a really long period of time, and I think that the evidence also supports that. Individuals when children commit crimes at such a young age that they just didn't have the capacity to understand exactly what they was doing at the time in many regards, in many respects, in many cases, and then eventually they would be incarcerated for the rest of their life, told that they can't be rehabilitated, which is just as untrue. I'm living proof that we can be rehabilitated, and I just want to say that. So if this bill could possibly take in consideration the eligibility for individuals who were sentenced to life when they was minors to become eligible after serving a particular amount of time, as opposed to the mandate for parole hearing for individuals who are initially sentenced to life as juveniles. I think this bill can definitely be an asset to our society. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear my testimony.
And I thank you very much for joining us this evening and giving your testimony. I don't see any questions of committee members, and I thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good evening. I believe it's Christy Hernandez from the National Police Wives Association on the line, and I also believe that you're speaking on 3 bills. So I will give you 6.5 minutes for the testimony.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today. Good evening. Thank you for permitting the National Police Wives Association Rhode Island affiliate an opportunity to speak today. Our testimony is in response to bills S0773, S0865, which we oppose in its current format. We are in support of Bill S0505. Again, my name is Christy Hernandez. I am a proud Latina, Rhode Island resident, mother, registered nurse, and wife of a law enforcement officer. I am a graduate of Central High School in Providence. My husband, Daniel, attended St. Teresa's Catholic School and graduated from Mount Pleasant High in 1996. A son of immigrant parents, his dream of becoming a police officer was fulfilled in 2014. We are not alone. There are many Rhode Island law enforcement families just like ours. As Rhode Islanders, we know one thing in our small but mighty state. I can say with assurance that each of you personally know, are related to, or know someone who knows a police officer. Our families are your constituents. We are your children's teachers, coaches. We are your nurses and essential workers. We are your neighbors and friends, because that is Rhode Island. We all know someone. Some individuals supporting these bills have spread misinformation about the effect of LEOBOR that is untrue. LEOBOR does not prevent officer discipline by chiefs of police, nor prosecution of officers. What it does is provide a fair, unbiased, and speedy process that is uniform for all officers, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or gender, and does not relate to criminal charges. Regarding the proposed changes to the hearing board, as a seasoned nurse, I have had years of training and retraining so that I understand the safest protocols in protecting and caring for human lives. I would not expect you as a civilian to be able to judge the critical thinking I employ in seconds during a patient emergency. Likewise, a civilian is not properly situated to make judgments about officer job performance or law enforcement standards. They are not trained in the weight of a duty belt, the weight of a gun, or mental weight of split-second decisions, especially in the atmosphere we live in today. Emotion is no basis upon which to make these judgments. Senator Mack provided lengthy information on what is wrong in communities far away from Rhode Island. You must make recommendations on what you know is broken here in Rhode Island, utilizing valid data, not rhetoric. In addition, and we say this passionately, we are part of your community. Our children are part of your community. They deserve the same safety and protection demanded by all to be fair, non-discriminatory, and unbiased. We look forward to continuing to serve our community as bridge builders during this time of reform and helping to search for common ground to ensure public safety for all Rhode Islanders. The National Police Wives Association looks forward to having a seat at the table for all police reform discussions. I thank you so much, Madam, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I believe Senator Rogers has a question for you, ma'am. Senator?
Okay.
Hi, thank you, Chair. This is going to be one of those Rhode Island small stories. Most of my fellow settlers and colleagues know I grew up in Boston. Been here a long time. And I had the opportunity to see her husband, Danny Hernandez, start his career in the town of Foster as a dispatcher. Very young, very intelligent, very hardworking. And I have, through the back scenes, followed his career after he left Foster, seeing him go to Providence, going through the police academy. I saw pictures when he graduated, and I just wanted to put that little touch on the situation. There are some very good, hardworking police officers. And Danny Hernandez is one who started out as a dispatcher. And he's got my kudos, and he has a great family. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Senator Rogers. I believe Senator Reptakis has a question.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just a comment. I just want to tell the witness that that was most honest testimony that I've heard in the last 2 hours regarding this piece of legislation. This is what we need. We need someone to testify and give us the facts, not innuendo and false information. I commend you very much for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great to be heard and to hear a different perspective on this reform. And while we agree with the community that yes, reform is necessary, we've been in Rhode Island most of our lives, and I've seen what Rhode Island has been, how it has transformed. And it's really important that we come together unified at a table and say, okay, what can we do to make this better? Leaving the rhetoric out of it, leaving out what's happening in communities far away from Rhode Island. We are a unique situation, and I hear a lot of community members angry and upset, but I also hear a lot of false accusations and untruths, and we need to really speak truthfully and honestly and have valid data to back it up.
I believe Senator Rogers has another question. Did you?
I just wish you would tell Danny that I said hi. I haven't seen him in many years, and wish him good luck. That's all I had to add.
Thank you. I believe Senator Archambault has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to add at this point that about the misinformation. A couple of witnesses ago, it was stated that in Lincoln, Ed Crowitz, he's an individual who had kicked a woman on a curb, that somehow he was protected by the law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights. That's not what happened at all. I remember reviewing that tape. I was prosecuting at the time for the town of Lincoln, and kudos to Chief Sullivan. He took swift action. I remember reviewing that tape, seeing the assault. He was charged criminally, and then he resigned before the law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights hearing. So there was no protection by the law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights for that individual. So, some people put things out there and they're not accurate anyway. And I appreciate the testimony of this witness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just very quickly would like to add that our elected officials have a responsibility to all constituents to state truths, to be factual, to be honest and transparent, and have shared governance. This is what we employed you to do. This is what we want you to do. It has to be facts and truth. And I hope we can get back to that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hernandez. Appreciate you joining us this evening and for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
We'll now move to our next witness. Good evening. Welcome to the committee. I believe we have Sherry Cruz on the line. You have 3.5 minutes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm testifying in support of Senate Bill 773, the repeal of LEOBOR, and I would like to thank Senator Mack for bringing this piece of legislation forward. The supposed primary role of the police is to protect and serve the public. Unfortunately, this has not been the reality for thousands of Rhode Islanders for decades. The reality has been that the role has been that of escalation and violence. During my adolescence as a teenager, I can point to direct accounts of police violence and abuses of power and misconduct. Myself and my siblings watched in horror as police responded to a noise complaint at our home. My mother responded to a pounding at the door and was asked by police to come out of the home for a call of a noise complaint. When my mother refused because she was in her nightgown, our door was kicked open, and me and my siblings watched in horror as our mother was dragged out of our home and beaten with clubs for this non-compliance. Not by one large man in a uniform, nor two, but half a dozen, beating a woman on the ground until she was unidentifiable. We then watched in horror as our brother went to pull police off my mother's limp body, only to be thrown into a wall, at which time my father came home and began to put his body in front of the clubs from hitting my mother in hopes to end this violent attack. The violent attack continued, but now a dozen more men in uniforms began beating both our parents, as me and my siblings watched in horror, screaming for the brutality to stop. This escalation of violence was brought on based on my mother's feeling she did not need to go out of her in her nightgown for a noise complaint. My mother was arrested and hospitalized for multiple head wounds and injuries and broken bones. My mother suffered from headaches for several years following this brutality. She died several years later due to the severe head trauma that resulted in a brain aneurysm. Police were never held accountable and had rights no other citizen has. Our family lives with this trauma, along with many other similar traumatic experiences by other family members and members of our community. These are not isolated incidences, and these are many examples. This brutality has gone unchecked far too long, and worse, this brutal behavior has been given added protections and due process rights since 1976. Added rights that no other profession is afforded, nor has the power to brutalize and take a life as that of the police. Again, LEOBOR gives special rights to police officers that ordinary people do not get and prevents communities from investigating misconduct that could lead to discipline. This brutality has caused generations of trauma and PTSD in the community and fear of those who are paid to protect us, particularly in poor communities and communities of color. It's time we end the protection of this lawlessness by the same individuals we, the public, pay our tax dollars to protect, serve, and keep us safe. It's time to hold this profession to a higher standard and bring integrity back to the profession by repealing LEOBOR in its entirety. In closing, I heard earlier in testimony by someone opposed to this bill that LEOBOR is only used infrequently. Then there is no reason or harm not to repeal LEOBOR in its entirety. The public is speaking now, and we ask you to listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Cruz. We appreciate you taking time to testify this evening. Our next witness.
Good evening, Joel Reinstein.
Yeah,
Yes, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
thanks. So I'm testifying in support of Senate Bill 703 for the full repeal of the so-called Bill of Rights for cops. Police violence and racism is out of control, no less in Rhode Island than across the country. I think to have a Bill of Rights, quote unquote, that enables cops trampling the actual rights of people in this state is outrageous. I'm wondering, where's the Bill of Rights for Jamal Gonsalves, who was chased down by Providence cops riding his moped and put into a coma when he crashed? When Jalen Butler joined the protests supporting Jamal and cops beat him into a seizure, where's his Bill of Rights? When he was slapped with charges of disorderly conduct and obstruction and failure to move as retaliation for his protesting, where was his Bill of Rights then? Where's the Bill of Rights for Jermaine Bruce, who in Providence was helping a friend with car trouble when the cops arrived in several cars, surrounded him, and ultimately beat and arrested him? He was also charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, despite video recordings proving that he hadn't done any of that. His real crime was that when the cops began towing his friend's car, he dared to talk back to them. So where's his Bill of Rights? Where's his free speech? I think the cops' Bill of Rights is a sham and a disgrace. It makes no sense to try to modify it. I think the bill repealing it is the only path forward, and Rhode Island will be a better and a freer place when it's repealed.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness from any members of the committee? No, thank you. Have a nice evening. Our next witness is Isaiah Tobias Lee. Good evening, Isaiah Tobias Lee.
Hello.
Hi, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
All right. I'd like to thank the chair and the committee for hearing me on this. My name is Isaiah Tobias Lee. I'm co-chair of Defund the Police Working Group in Providence, DSA. But today I am representing myself and my own point of view as someone who has experienced the injustice of the Providence legal system so many times. We need to stop giving the police permission to run wild. This is not a Western movie. The police killed someone on May 7th while he was in clear need of medical attention. Jamal Gonsalves was participating in an event to get young people of Providence to leave crime for biking when he was run over by a member of Providence police. His cousin, Jalen Butler, went to a protest to support Jamal and was beaten to the point of having a seizure and given no medical attention, but instead was arrested. Rashad Gore was beaten and arrested for sitting in his girlfriend's car. Jermaine Bruce was surrounded by cops, beaten and arrested for trying to fix his friend's car. Simone Phoenix was beaten, arrested, and forced into a mental hospital when she went to the government and asked for housing support to escape her abusive husband. Personally, I was arrested for showing up to a protest as a medic and sexually assaulted by the first police officer who found out I was trans when I was in jail. And I have had plenty of negative encounters with the police before then. The police don't need protection from the people. The people need protection from the police. Suspensions and firings and prosecution of police officers is made more difficult by LEOBOR, but LEOBOR was passed for a much bigger reason, to let us as the people of Rhode Island know that law enforcement officers have an intrinsic right to kill, and that we as the people of Rhode Island have a responsibility to shut up and take it. If the police really need a Bill of Rights, if they feel threatened by the people they are policing, then protect them and abolish the police. If they really feel unsafe in their jobs, they should not have their jobs at all. Maintaining the system is hurting Black and Indigenous people. It's hurting all people of color. It's hurting trans people. It's hurting disabled and deaf people. It's hurting anyone who isn't a millionaire. And the police are claiming that they are also hurt by being police officers. So let them stop suffering and abolish the police. Don't protect the LEOBOR bill. Right now, the DSA defunds the police committee. Today, the DSA defunds the police committee was meeting about the recent death of a man in Providence who needed medical attention and was attacked by Providence police. So many of DSA's members were talking about how they have nearly had their lives ended because a police officer thought that they were a threat for being in the wrong neighborhood, for being out too late, for being the wrong skin color. These are assassinations. If a police officer has to go on paid leave for too long in order for someone else not to die, my conscience is clean, and yours should be too, for repealing LEOBOR. Listen to your constituents. We are dying. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from this witness or any members of the committee? No, thank you. Have a nice evening. Our next witness is Kimberly DeCoop. Good evening, Kimberly. It's either DeCup or DeCoop. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly.
DeCoupe.
Thank you, DeCoupe. You're welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Yes, so I'm just testifying for the LEOBOR repeal bill. I think it's very important, especially in this moment when, we're talking about the conversations of Black Lives Matter, for us to do things that are going to help the movement here locally. And one of the things we've seen here in Rhode Island is that this LEOBOR law is basically shielding police officers from accountability. So when they do things that are wrong, when they hurt people and do things that are against the law, it's very hard to hold them accountable because of this law. And I think it's past due time that we get rid of it, especially if we want to claim that, we want to see a better society. We're only going to make the job of police officers harder if the communities don't trust them, and the communities can't trust them when there's no accountability for every time they break the law. Regular people get accountability, right? They have to pay fees or they have to go to jail. Police officers have to go through the same thing. They have to be held accountable, and if they're found to be guilty of wrongdoing, whether that's, any type of police brutality, stealing, whatever it is, then they need to go to jail just like everyone else. But until we repeal LEOBOR, that's going to be very hard to do. So I think that's the first step. And, this law really didn't need to be in the books, and it hasn't been in the books for that long as well. So it can easily be repealed. That's my comment.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Have a nice evening. Our next witness is Haley McKee with the Super PAC. Good evening, Haley.
Good evening, Chairwoman Quinn.
Yes,
Am I live?
Yes, it's okay. You're welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes, and you may proceed.
Hello, Senator Archambault and members of the committee. My name is Haley McKee. I am co-chair of the Substance Use Policy Education and Recovery PAC. I'm also a Dare Behind the Walls member, and I'm here in strong support of S773. I just want to voice a little bit of disappointment in response to some of the testimony that I've heard this evening in support for a law enforcement officer's wife, and basically essentially no comment in regards to people who have voiced their personal experiences with law enforcement brutality. I just want to put that out there. So I opened up a national news thread this week, and I saw a man from Providence cuffed and held on his stomach who suddenly stopped yelling or moving and was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. His name was Joseph. And it was suspected that he had substance use disorder or mental health issues. I work with people with substance use disorder and mental health issues, and I can say with full surety that I've never had to restrain a person, nor has a person ever died in my care. It's not necessary. So I heard a Senate Judiciary member's comments along the lines of chaos, melee, mayhem, and the hell in the handbasket kind of narrative, should this kind of reform pass. And my beliefs are that people are generally inclined to do the right thing, that humans are inherently kind, that this proposed legislation is not about civilians, it is about the people who are expected to protect and serve and are paid to do so, who sometimes go the wrong way, such as other people do. And I think the history of the police union movement of the 60s that emerged as a result of the criticism of police conduct by civil rights forced and demanded action for civilian review of the police. This was in response to accusations of systemic racism and brutality decades ago. I hope we know better now. So these unions were created to enable political force that elects sympathetic public officials, often such as yourselves, to secure the enactment and protections of such legislation and this is namely LEOBOR. This is what the unions were created for. And I can say as a policy person who works in the General Assembly, very oftentimes that this has created a monster. And these are not mutually exclusive concepts. So the police unions, and I know Sidney Wardell from Little Compton, this is a district that does not affect his people within that district, nor does it most of the Police Chiefs Association. It's a literal Death Star to criminal justice reform. And having worked in policy for some time, without opening a can of worms, one cannot separate one from the other. So for the 16 states that have enacted LEOBOR, Rhode Island in 76 is in company with Alabama, Kentucky, West Virginia, Louisiana, and Florida. And Maryland and Rhode Island were largely known to have the most formidable LEOBOR laws, and Maryland was just repealed. And I don't want to be redundant, because I know some other testimonies have commented on this. And just to answer on like falsities, we see this all the time on a ground level. So a lot of people who were arrested at events last summer were pretty badly bruised and beaten, right? I've been on the receiving end of police brutality. Look at the Wyatt. Look at Jamal Gonzalez, right? This is not based on infactual stuff. These are real things that happen to our community members every single day. So I really strongly urge this committee to support the passage of the complete repeal of LEOBOR, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Haley. Are there any questions for this witness from any members of the committee? No, hearing none. Have a nice night. Our next witness is Miko Leonard. Good evening, Miko Leonard.
Yep, that's me.
Yep. Welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, I'm Miko. I'm from Cranston, and I'm testifying in support of Bill 773 to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. I'm supporting this because I feel that what we have now isn't fair or even necessary. We're one of only 15 states with the Police Officers' Bill of Rights. It's clearly not fundamental legislation. I don't really believe we should have created it in the first place, and it's pretty clear that Rhode Island is an outlier in having such a prejudiced piece of legislation. And I think that it's really like an impediment to accountability. And I read, actually, the piece of legislation itself, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, and the entire thing is super prejudiced towards police officers because of the panel that you have to try a police officer accused of misconduct. The entire thing is current or previous police officers, and that's just obviously a biased hearing. There's no part of that that makes any sense. And just reading through it, there are so many special privileges given to police officers that civilians don't have, such as getting to know like who's gonna ask the questions given to them, and these are just things that civilians don't have. And I'm really worried if something like the killing of George Floyd was to happen in Rhode Island, that this police officer could not be gotten rid of, could not be fired, and would continue to get paid, and that's a really scary thing for Rhode Island. So I definitely support getting rid of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is Ariana Cunha. Waiting to see if she picks up. So if you could stand by. All right, we can't get an answer, so we're going to move on. She's out. She certainly can call back. Just stand by for 1 minute, please. Our next witness is Vernon R. Martin II. Hi, Vernon R. Martin II.
Yes, speaking.
Yes, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may proceed.
Thank you for granting me an audience today. I am in full support of the repeal of LEOBOR, bill number 0773. I just want to stand in solidarity with what Mayor Jorge Elorza said. He said a lot of the points that I was going to make a lot more eloquently maybe than I would have. I I also want to say that just in my experience with community meetings and interacting with the community in other arenas, it just feels like in their mind, the police have like an iron fist on the public, and it feels like Providence is just like a prison population instead of a community. So I feel like repealing LEOBOR, starting from scratch, and really reimagining community policing would really build up that sense of community and make a difference. I know there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of opinions and emotions on both sides. So I just want to take this opportunity to say that, again, I support the full repeal of LEOBOR, and an effort should be made on both sides. Thank you for having my testimony.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is Michaela McKay. Good evening, Michaela McKay.
Hi.
Hi, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Michaela. I'm a Rhode Island resident, and I am testifying in support of Bill 773, repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We cannot expect to hold law enforcement accountable when they are allowed special rights that prevent their actions from being investigated. Justice shouldn't look like months of fighting to bring a police misconduct case to light. Justice should be a system that holds itself to a higher standard of accountability. We cannot have a just system when officers are allowed to act with impunity. It is unconscionable to think that people who are given authority and allowed to act without consequence will always use their power correctly. We need to be able to uphold the law as it pertains to all people, and we cannot do that when officers who are guilty of misconduct are given paid vacations or slaps on the wrist. Please hear your constituents and repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights so we can begin taking the steps we need to create a safer Rhode Island. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice night. Our next witness is Alexandra Garay. Good evening, Alexandra Garay.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Welcome to the committee.
To
you have
testify in support.
Yes, you have 3.5 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you. I am in support of Bill 773. I, like many of the others that care about our safety in the community, are testifying and asking for the bare minimum. We're tired of the abuse, traumatizing, and gaslighting coming from the police. In the testimony, we mourn those who have died and been harmed at the hands of the Providence Police Department and are just asking for the bare minimum of accountability. With only 50 states having LEOBOR established, there's no excuse for us to be one of them. New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts don't have one. Let's join Maryland and abolish LEOBOR. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. You have a nice evening. Our next witness is Daniel Denver with RECO. Good evening, Daniel Denver.
Good evening. Can
Yes,
you hear me all right?
I can. Welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes and you may proceed.
All right. Thanks very much, Chairman. My name is Daniel Denver, and I'm a co-chair of Reclaim RI, a group fighting for social and economic justice across the Ocean State. I will keep my comments brief. Last summer's protest movement against police violence was the largest protest movement in U.S. history. Repealing the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights is an obvious first step that Rhode Island legislators can and should take. There should not be a special Bill of Rights that protects police from allegations of abuse when there is just one Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Repealing LEOBOR is just a first step, though. We need the legislature and city governments across the state to divest funds from policing and incarceration and invest funds in education, mental health services, and programs that emphasize harm reduction for drug users. I want to thank Senator Mack for introducing this legislation and the rest of you for your time this evening. Please repeal this special Bill of Rights for police and ensure that victims of police violence and abuse can seek justice. It's time for the legislature to respond to last summer's protests. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Have a nice evening. Our next witness is Gregory Greco. Good evening, Gregory Greco.
Hi, yes.
Hi, welcome to the committee. You have 3.5 minutes and you may begin.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Gregory Greco. I live in East Providence, and I'm calling in support of the LEOBOR repeal, Senate Bill 773. So I've been a teacher for a long time, about half the time in Providence, about half the time in the Brockton area, and I can safely say I know Massachusetts does not have LEOBOR, and Providence does. And you can take this with a grain of salt, but this is my experience as a teacher, about a decade in each place, that there's a palpable difference in the way that my students in Providence, my students in Brockton view the police. And there's far more concern, stress among the students I work with in Providence. There's a tangible fear, I would say, because I think that they understand that they feel helpless in situations where where the police have all the power and all the control. And I think whether or not that's explicitly due to LEOBOR, I think that's something that resonates with those students. And I think there are statistics that do back that up. Nationally, of the states that do have LEOBOR, there's a higher percentage of police shootings of civilians, a higher percentage of police shootings of civilians of color, particularly Latino, where it's almost double the average of states that do not have LEOBOR. There's also fewer police officers charged for on-duty shootings, which means that despite the fact that there's more shootings, there's less accountability. And I think that a cumulative effect of that lack of accountability permeates through kind of the way the students in both of those cities kind of view the lens they view the police. And that's not to say that the police, there of course that's my view of the students that I saw. But again, having a special rights for police officers, I understand they have a very dangerous job, and credence is given to that. But having an entire Bill of Rights that I think it's shown again and again in study after study does not serve the interests of people in the community. And it's Maryland made the decision, I think the wise decision to choose the community over the power of life and death that the police have. And I think that you're hearing the community in Rhode Island ask you to consider that as well. It's not in the long-term interest of the state. In nowhere where the LEOBOR exists is it helping the communities that it's there for. And therefore, we should find something that does. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Have a nice evening. That completes our witness list for 773. We are going to move on now to Senate Bill 865 by Senator Quesada, and our first witness is Brian Daniels with the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns. Brian, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Vice Chair Archambault, and thank you to you and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify. This is Brian Daniels.
And Brian, if I may, you have a whole bunch of bills you're testifying on, so we're going to increase your time. You could take a good 20 minutes to cover the ground, so don't feel that you have to rush. Go ahead, you may proceed.
I appreciate that. Much of what I've said has already been said before, and I know the committee has been very patient, so I'll try to go quickly. Again, this is Brian Daniels, Executive Director of the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns, and testifying in support of Senator Quesada's Bill 865, and also been listening to the testimony on 773 and 505. Wanted to talk more broadly about the League's position on the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. That's an issue of importance to cities and towns. So last summer, the League of Cities and Towns created a working group to consider reforms to LEOBOR. We had a number of different municipal officials from different communities, that participated in that effort. And in so doing, they talked with Sid Wardell and other members of the Police Chiefs Association. You heard from Chief Wardell earlier today. I also talked with some labor attorneys, their solicitors, to really get a sense of what they considered the biggest challenges to law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. So many of the proposals that they recommended that came before the Senate's Study Commission last year are very similar to proposals that Senator Quezada has in her bill and that Chairwoman Anastasia Williams has in the House. So I'll go over those briefly just to give you a sense of where people stand on that. First is extending the suspension period of officers for up to 10 days without a LEOBOR hearing. As the committee knows, the current law allows for 2 days, and Chief Wardell pulled some data and spoke with a number of police chiefs, and looking at the different types of disciplinary cases that came before police chiefs and LEOBOR board, it seemed that 10 days was a reasonable amount of time that we thought that people could extend that period where you don't need you could do a suspension without going to a LEOBOR review. Anything much longer than that, one of the things we talked about is whether or not it should be longer than that. I think people are open to longer, but one thing that did come up among the police chiefs and some of the mayors and managers is that once you get out past a few weeks, you're probably looking at serious disciplinary situations where you might be terminating. So 10 days seemed to be a pretty reasonable amount of time. So that was one of the recommendations. One other item that came up is something that has been discussed by a few people who have testified today, is the ability to comment publicly on cases, pending disciplinary cases, particularly if there is a case of possible criminal acts. We've heard, particularly from mayors and managers, when there is a high-profile incident and they're asked for comment, if they can't confirm or deny an investigation, that puts them in a very difficult position, and it undermines confidence in both the police force and also local government. So being able to comment publicly on some of those cases is something that our group recommended. We also believe that, as Senator Quezada's bill suggests, is changing the LEOBOR hearing board so that it's a standing committee. We had also recommended 5 people with 3 permanent members, at least 2 of whom have a background with law enforcement or labor law, and the other 2 being members of, as it is now, an officer's representative and the management's representative. As you heard from Chief Wardell, not a lot of cases go to full LEOBOR boards, but one thing that we did here is that when they go to if something does go to LEOBOR board, it does not, they're not necessarily standardized disciplinary rules or ways that the board decides. So we looked to other groups like the Disability Subcommittee of the Retirement Board, which reviews all disability pension applications, or the State Labor Relations Board, where you have a standing group that allows some consistency across different cases. So that was one of the recommendations that came from there as well. And then a couple of other items were largely more process-oriented. One was making pre-hearing discovery rules reciprocal so that officers would have to provide the law enforcement agency any witness statements or evidence intended to be used at a hearing. The opposite of that is true now, so we just want to make that reciprocal. And then also, any costs of LEOBOR hearings should be shared equally between the employer and the officer's representative. Currently, the employer bears all of those costs right now. So those were the main concepts. Again, many of those are reflected, at least directionally, in Senator Quezada's bill, so we are supportive of that with possibly some of the recommended changes we made. And I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I don't see any questions right now of committee members. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your testimony tonight.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairwoman.
You're welcome. And Good evening. Welcome to the committee. I believe we have Randall Rose on the line. And
Yes.
Mr. Rose, I believe you're speaking on about 8 bills, so you may have 20 minutes of time.
Thank you. That's very generous of you. I appreciate it very much. Speaking on multiple bills in 3 minutes can often be unworkable. So I want to speak on a number of the police-related bills, but let me just briefly address the juvenile parole bill first. I am in support of the bill that allows people who committed a crime as a juvenile to have a parole hearing after 15 years if they're not sentenced to life. That's Senator Quezada's bill, Senate 333. And the reason for that is very simple, because sometimes people do change a lot from when they're 17 to when they're in their 30s or 40s. When the judge imposes a sentence, the judge can only make a decision based on what the person responsible who is found guilty is like at that time. The judge does not know how the person will turn out later. And over the course of decades, a young person who did something very wrong when they were 16 or 17 may change, and the judge is not in a position to know it. So the judge's sentence may no longer be appropriate, there really needs to be some flexibility, because right now we're asking the judge to foresee what's going to happen after the change from being a teenager to being an adult. And nobody can really foresee that. So there needs to be some way in the system that we can allow for people who committed a very serious crime when they were 16 or 17 to be paroled if they've changed and matured and repented and learned from their mistakes. And again, this bill does not apply to the most serious cases where the judge clearly says life without parole. But if the judge says parole after 30 years based on what the kid's like now, you do need to be able to revisit that. So that's why I'm in support of that bill. So going on to the police bills, the most important ones are the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights related bills. And I understand that there was a case for I am one of the people who doesn't think we should have the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. I do think we should follow the lead of state like Maryland that's repealed their Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. But I do want to say I do understand that there was originally a case for having a Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which is if police officers are subject to discipline for some administrative matter, like if they back their police car into a wall or something like that, you do want to make sure they have a fair process and that they are not subject to dismissal or threats of dismissal due to political pressure and so on. That's all very appropriate it's all very appropriate to have a clear internal process like LEOBOR provides when what the police officer is accused of is simply an administrative violation. But when it comes to the kind of more high-profile cases that have been spurring a lot of public outrage, where the police officer is accused of actually violating a civilian's rights, then you don't want to have the kind of internal police-run procedure that LEOBOR provides. So LEOBOR's procedure for a hearing before a board of officers is fine for if it's disciplined just over some internal matter that doesn't involve civilians' rights. When it does involve civilians' rights, I think we need to have civilians involved, and it shouldn't be just handled within the force, because the police officers have their own perspective, and you need to have the civilian perspective in there, particularly civilians from the communities who are most likely to have their rights abused in certain situations. So for that reason, by the way, I am So I would be fine with repealing LEOBOR, but my best preference would be to just keep it for purely the LEOBOR procedure for purely administrative issues, and have a different procedure with a civilian hearing board for issues where there's an allegation of violation of civilians' rights. That is also, by the way, why I'm opposed to Senator Burke's bill, S505, because it's just too little, too late. It keeps the process entirely in terms of a hearing before a committee of police officers or former officers. There's no civilian involvement at all. That's just too little, too late, and it does not meet the widespread concerns. I am in support of Senator Quezada's bill. Which is, I don't think is perfect. Nothing's perfect, but it definitely is an improvement. Everything in Senator Quezada's bill is an improvement, and it does make sure that we there is at least a small amount of civilian presence. Not as much as I'd like, but there's some. I really wish we could do something about the ban on public statement by police departments while the disciplinary process is ongoing. It should be a lot easier to release video evidence if there's a public complaint of an officer potentially violating someone's rights. But it is a good step forward, and it does inject a little more civilian input into the process. Going on to Senate Bill 671, Senator Quinn's bill to ban the release of the hometown of police officers. We have a real problem in Rhode Island where a lot of cities and towns would like to hire a local police force, and the General Assembly just does not allow them to do it. The General Assembly has passed a law saying that towns cannot require their officers to live in the town. Cities and towns cannot even require their officers to live in Rhode Island. So cities and towns are forced to hire officers who may live out of state and have no attachment to Rhode Island, and certainly no attachment to the city or town that they're patrolling, except that they happen to work there. Unfortunately, Senator Coyne's bill says that you can't find out whether a police officer who's been the subject of complaints lives in the town or not. You can't do statistical research to see whether the officers that have been the subject of complaints are more likely than other officers to live out of town or out of state entirely. So it just prohibits the research that will be needed to find out what sort of harmful effect this requirement is having, that cities and towns have to hire officers even if they're out of state. And I know in my hometown in Providence, there have been elected officials would like to be able to hire officers preferably in the city, not be required to hire officers who live out of town or out of state, but we can't even let them do research. I know there's an argument that's preventing the release of an officer's hometown will help keep the officer safe. But in this day and age, it's if somebody is trying to find out, if some hostile person is trying to find out where someone lives, they can find it out. It's very easy to do that research to find it out. It doesn't really do anything to protect officers. And if somebody did make a public records request for an officer's hometown and it was thought there was a threat, you can bet that officer would have priority to get protection from their police force to make sure that they remain safe. So it's really not necessary to keep officers safe from retaliation. We have, or from vengeful people who the officer has arrested. We have been just fine for decades without this law on the books that Senator Quinn is sponsoring. There have been no cases of officers being harmed or being attacked just because somebody filed a public records request. That's not realistic. Public records requests are not used by vengeful people to attack police. They are used to do research, and this bill is preventing that research from happening, even though I know that's not Senator Coyne's intention. I am opposed to the bill as it stands. Finally, let me go on to the actual policing reform bill, Senator Acosta's bill S597. I think a lot of the provisions in that bill have been supported by the Democrats in Congress at the national level. Certainly at the national level, the Democratic Party wants to pass these reforms, such as allowing for more transparency, and banning chokeholds. But I think it would be incumbent on us in Rhode Island to pass these reforms, encouraging police not to use techniques that have a high risk of causing unnecessary harm. We don't want police to use chokeholds, which have been banned in many jurisdictions, which can end up killing someone when that wasn't even the officer's intention. Unfortunately, even now it's still fairly common to find police officers who make mistakes about whether a chokehold is going to kill someone. There was a case just recently in California when they did kill someone by constricting their breathing and didn't intend to kill them, but they misinterpreted the signs, and police are just not well trained to interpret the signs, and in the heat of the moment, it's easy to use more force than necessary. It's very important to ban chokeholds, and one of the best provisions in that bill is requiring police officers to be careful about not using more force than necessary. And of course, that's a judgment call, but it does put into law that the police should be careful not to use force that's not necessary under the circumstances. And I noticed when critics of this bill have submitted written testimony against it, they say, this bill isn't good, it would make police second-guess themselves. Yes, that is precisely the point. It sets some guidelines and says you should not be using too much force. You should be careful and think first, is this force necessary or not? And you should make sure that, and it does tell police officers to exercise a little more care than some officers sometimes have. And that thinking twice, or what they call second guessing, is actually precisely what's needed in many cases for officers to avoid making mistakes, to avoid causing so much the deaths that have caused a lot of nationwide trauma and hurt and upset and grief, and I'm fine if there's a provision out of the bill that says in an emergency, when there's little time to think, they may give more leeway when it's hard for officers to make a split-second decision. But all the same, there should be some requirement that sets out clearly: don't shoot someone when they're not a threat to when they're not an imminent threat to anyone and not committing a violent crime. Those kind of common sense provisions need to be in the law. And one of the other very good provisions in this bill is that it does really encourage, it does really make clear that when one police officer is about to use excessive force, other police officers on the scene do have a duty to keep that from happening. And it does say that just because someone is your fellow officer doesn't mean you should allow them to break the law and use excessive force and cause unnecessary harm. And that's a very good provision because it makes clear that officers' loyalty should be not first of all to their fellow officers, but to the state and community that they are supposed to serve. And if you don't include a requirement that officers are supposed to speak out and stop other officers from using excessive force, what's going to happen is the esprit de corps, the spirit of the force, is going to cause officers to look the other way when other officers act abusive. It's going to cause officers to ignore the law in practice because they are going to just be used to standing in solidarity with their fellow officers, even when their fellow officers go too far. We need to change the culture there. We need to tell officers that their first duty is to the community and the state and the people, which some officers know already, but this bill would help change the police culture in a good way so that you won't have a thin blue line where officers where officers regularly allow other officers to go too far. So I like the bill. I think it provides a lot more useful transparency and then helps get us a lot closer to a future where officers share the values of the community that they're part of and where they are trusted when they use force. So for all those reasons, I'm in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony on the many bills this evening. And I don't see any questions of committee members at this time. Thank you for joining us, and again, thank you for your testimony this evening. With that, I believe that concludes our public testimony for this evening. I'd like to entertain a motion for adjournment. So moved by Senator Reptakis, seconded by Senator Burke. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.